This discussion is about what do you do if you have an emergency in your operation? Things like trailer breakdowns and wrecks. What do you do if you find a bunch of dead animal? What do you do when you find an injured animal? What happens if there's a disease outbreak in your operation? What happens if there's a breach in biosecurity? What happens when there's weather-related disasters? And what happens, heaven forbid, if you have an exposure to dangerous materials? Let's begin the discussion talking about a trailer breakdown. I think one of the first things that you need to think about is what is the well-being of the animal? What's the current environmental conditions that you're in? Okay, is it hot? Is it cold? What is the situation for the animals inside the trailer? And we need to think about animal comfort, okay, and how do we best position those animals for well-being. We also need to think about time on the trailer without feed and water. All of these things may lead up to the point where we're going to have to make sure that we've got a backup plan. You know, is there somebody we can call that will allow us to offload animals onto another trailer? We can offload those animals into a holding area for a short period of time. And I think the other part of this whole trailer breakdown is how long is it going to take to get the trailer fixed or the truck fixed that might be pulling that rig. The other part would be a trailer wreck. Again, we need to think about animal well-being. What do we do with the injured animals? How do we handle that? Okay, what do we do with the dead animals, and how do we dispose of those properly? You also need to think about the dangers to the people that are around, particularly the people that are on foot. You know, a lot of times whenever these animals are in a wreck, they're going to be very nervous. They're going to be high-strung. They may be in a position where they're going to charge people and objects. And so we need to be concerned about that, and we need to think about that before it might happen. The other problem is, you know, if you're on a busy highway, an interstate, or whatever, you know, and these animals wandering around, what's going to be the danger to vehicular traffic and the people that are riding in those vehicles? And then I think we need to think about, before it ever happens, who would you call in the case of a trailer wreck, and make sure that the proper authorities are contacted. What happens if you have dead animals? Okay, you come across a group of animals that are dead, and I think you need to start thinking about how do you diagnose, you know, or at least give a preliminary diagnosis of why those animals have died. For example, is there any toxic materials around, like herbicides or insecticides, that these animals might have been able to consume? Fertilizer. Okay, might be another area where you've got a spill of a fertilizer and the animals may have consumed it. It may be grain overload, all right, where you know, animals had consumed, for example, in a cornfield, corn that had been spilled out of the combine during offload, where acute acidosis might have been a problem. Salt might be a problem in case of, you know, if the only water supply that these animals have to drink might be contaminated with salt. Salt obviously can kill animals, okay, in high levels. Poisonous plants are another possibility, like are there cherry trees after a storm? And one of the things that's recommended is that you, after a storm, you know, you go out and check if you've got cherry trees that are down, because wilted leaves on cherry trees can be toxic. Japanese yews, okay, those ornamental plants that people oftentimes put around their house. You know, the clippings from those, or if animals get out and consume Japanese yews, it doesn't take very much to kill animals. There's other things. There's other, like snake root and others that might be possibilities in overgrazing situations as well. Another possibility would be an overdose of pharmaceuticals, all right, you know, where maybe the label directions hadn't been adequately followed, or there was a miscommunication someplace, and animals were overdosed with a particular pharmaceutical. Another possibility would be disease, all right, that you know, probably need to get somebody in that can diagnose the disease, run the diagnostic test necessary to identify a disease before it spreads further. Another possibility would be electrocution. Okay, that could be from lightning. electrical storms, or it could be stray voltage, through our electrical system and through the water system, for example. And I think, again, we need to think about who would you call in the situation of having dead animals. What about injured animals? Well, it's one of those deals where an ounce of prevention is probably worth a pound of cure. Early diagnosis and intervention obviously is important, but if we can prevent injury, that would even be better. And again, who would you call? And one of the things that we need to maybe think about in terms of injured animals is making sure that we've got our facilities are adequately maintained so the animals don't break through boards on a trailer or be injured by nails that are sticking out or other sharp protruding objects, whatever. Make sure that the facilities are in good repair. In terms of a disease outbreak, again, early diagnosis and treatment is really important. It may be necessary that you quarantine groups, okay, to prevent it spread even through your own operation, let alone spread from your operation to other people's operation. We have to think about transmissible diseases that are transmissible between animals, and then also transmissible diseases as it relates to humans, okay? So the zoonotic diseases, animal to human situations like ringworm and TB and brucellosis, and there is a host of others that might be of concern. And so knowing what the disease is and taking the proper precautions to prevent it from being transmitted from animal to animal and animal to human. And again, who should you call in the case of a disease outbreak? What about a breach in security, biosecurity in particular? Early detection, okay, is obviously important in terms of a breach. What are the rules and regulations that you've established for visitors on your farm? Where can they go? What can they see without having to go through other precautions? What about stray animals that may come on your property? And that may be the neighbor's cattle. It may be wild animals of some kind, okay, that could carry a disease. And we're not going to get around all the stray animals, and particularly the wild animals, but having good fences goes a long ways in keeping some of that away from your operation and probably keeping away neighbor animals, cattle in particular. Again, we may need to quarantine groups if there's a breach in biosecurity to prevent spread within your own operation. And again, who should you call if you have questions? What about weather-related disasters, tornadoes, hurricanes? Each year, those are going to take place someplace in the country, and we need to know what would we do if we had power outages and we have ice and snow and we can't deliver feed and water to animals, and animals might be in cold stress, and what happens if we have heat and humidity? And how do we provide shade and shelter for those animals in those various situations? And how do we get clean feed and water to those animals that's not contaminated? The last issue is self-exposure to dangerous materials. Those could be self-injection of antimicrobials. It could be skin absorption of things like prostaglandins. Okay, and particularly that's an issue for ladies that it might have an effect on their estrous cycles. Inhalation of compounds, whether it be mycotoxins, okay, from maybe some moldy feeds, but it could be inhalation of some of the chemicals that we use in our everyday operations. So it's really important that you know the products that are being used, understand the risks and precautions, read and follow label directions, and again, if you have questions, who should you call if there happens to be a spill or a self-injection or absorption of a product or inhalation of a product? In summary, expect the unexpected and develop a well-thought-out plan. Your personnel need to be trained. Okay, those people that are helping you work cattle or feed cattle need to be trained in what to do if there's a problem. Stay calm. Okay, and again, make sure that you know who to call and that phone numbers are appropriate listed throughout your operation so that you don't have to think about what those numbers might be in the case of an emergency. They're well posted and they're readily accessible.